A billionaire tied a child and a sick foal right on the train tracks, and as the train got closer, it all seemed lost. But what happened in the final seconds left everyone in shock. Watch until the end and see the twist no one saw coming. Subscribe so you don't miss the next stories that defy logic. In Blue Ridge, a small town nestled among the valleys of the Appalachian Mountains, life moved at the slow pace typical of rural America. The railroad tracks that cut through the region, a legacy from the golden age of coffee plantations, now served only for cargo transport and for an experimental train that the Future Valley Company tested twice a week. The colonial-style houses, stone streets and central square with its century-old church created a setting where everyone knew each other by first and last name. It was in this place that Jack Miller, a farmer in his 50s with graying hair and sun-weathered skin, maintained his small property along the railroad tracks. Every day before sunrise, Jack walked the trail that followed the tracks to check on his crops. But on that May morning, with fog still hanging low over the fields, his routine would be drastically altered. From a distance, he spotted a strange silhouette near the tracks. As he approached, his heart raced when he realized it was a young colt, visibly weakened, lying on the railroad tracks. However, what made Jack freeze was noticing that tied to the animal with firm ropes was a girl of about 10 years old, unconscious. Both seemed to have been deliberately left there, in a position that prevented any sudden movement without one hurting the other. "Good Lord in heaven, what is this?" muttered Jack, approaching cautiously. The colt, with its brown coat, was breathing with difficulty. Its visible ribs revealed malnutrition. The girl, with curly hair and tan skin, wore a dirty and torn school uniform. Jack tried to untie the ropes, but they were so well secured that he would need tools. He looked at his watch, 6:15 in the morning. The Future Valley experimental train would pass by at 8 o'clock sharp. It was an autonomous prototype, without an engineer, part of a railway modernization project. Without wasting time, he ran back to his house to get help. On the way, he passed by the house of his friend, Samuel Owens, a retired railroad worker who still kept a working amateur radio. "Sam, I need your help. There's a child and a horse tied to the tracks. The train will pass in less than 2 hours." Samuel, a 70-year-old black man with shrewd eyes and calloused hands, asked no questions. He immediately entered his house and began trying to contact the railway central station in Atlanta. Meanwhile, Jack continued to the town center in search of more help. In the central square, he found Tara, the teacher at the region's only municipal school, opening the doors of the bakery that had belonged to her family for 3 generations. "Tara, I need urgent help. There's a girl tied to a colt on the tracks. The train will pass by soon." Jack's words spread quickly through the small town. In a few minutes, a group of residents was heading toward the tracks, carrying knives, scissors, and pliers to cut the ropes. Among them was Dr. Richard, the town's only doctor, who brought his first aid kit. At Samuel's house, the response from the railway central station was discouraging. The train had already departed from the previous station, and being an autonomous prototype in testing phase, there was no way to stop it remotely. "What are we going to do, Sam?" asked Jack, returning to his friend's house after organizing the rescue group. "There's an old switching system about 2 miles from here. It hasn't been used in years, but if we can activate it, we can divert the train to the abandoned branch." "A line?" replied Samuel, already putting on his boots. Meanwhile, at the location where the girl and the colt were, Dr. Richard was trying to assess the condition of both. The animal appeared to have been sedated, but was still responding to stimuli. The girl was beginning to regain consciousness, murmuring disconnected words. "Easy, little one. We're going to get you out of there," said the doctor, while others worked to cut the ropes. That's when Tara recognized the child. "It's Lily!" The girl who disappeared from Daybreak Farm 3 days ago. Daybreak Farm was the largest property in the region, recently acquired by Lucas Vaughan, a businessman from New York, who claimed to be interested in investing in the area's agricultural development. Since his arrival less than a year ago, Vaughan had kept to himself, frequently hiring and firing employees, all required to sign confidentiality agreements. Rumors circulated that he conducted advanced research in his private laboratory and had an impressive collection of purebred horses. Someone needs to go there and inform them that the girl has been found, suggested one of the residents. Not now, cut in Jack. First, we need to save the girl and the animal, then we'll find out what happened. The news spread rapidly. Paul Sanders, a young reporter for the local newspaper who dreamed of a career in mainstream media, arrived at the scene with his camera and drone. Soon, the first images of the scene were being shared in the region's WhatsApp groups. Amidst the confusion, little Lily began to speak more clearly. The man from the big house. He said it was a test, that he wanted to see if anyone would come to save us. The girl's words caused a momentary silence among those present. Dr. Richard exchanged glances with Tara. Both had heard strange stories about the new owner of Daybreak Farm, but until then, nothing had been proven. As they tried to process the information, a noise in the distance announced that time was running out. The experimental train was approaching, and the rescue operation needed to be accelerated. Jack, take half of these people to the switching system. You have less than an hour to make it work, shouted Samuel, naturally assuming the role of leader due to his experience as a railroad worker. The rest stay here with me, trying to free the girl and the animal. The tension was palpable. The distant sound of the train gradually increased as the teams worked against time. In the midst of the chaos, Paul was broadcasting everything live on social media, attracting attention not only from local residents, but also from animal and child protection organizations that began pressuring state authorities for immediate intervention. In Atlanta, the Society for the Protection of Animals and the Child Welfare Council were already mobilizing resources. A helicopter was even sent, but the mountain weather conditions prevented safe landing. With the train approaching and options running out, the small community of Blue Ridge faced its greatest challenge: to save a child and an animal, to unravel the mystery behind this absurd situation, and, most importantly, to prove that even in times where individualism prevails, solidarity and empathy can still move mountains, or in this case, divert a train. At the old switching station, overgrown with weeds and rust, Jack led the group of determined residents to reactivate the abandoned mechanism. Among them was Gabriel, Samuel's grandson, a young engineer who had recently returned to Blue Ridge after completing his studies in the capital. "The structure is completely rusted," observed Gabriel, examining the main lever. "We need oil and a lot of strength to move it." The calloused hands of the rural workers joined those of the young engineer, while Jack coordinated the efforts. Time, always so generous in that small town where days seemed to drag on, now flowed mercilessly. 10 miles away, the Future Valley experimental train was advancing silently, its cutting-edge technology contrasting with the rural landscape. On board, only sensors and computers, without human intervention. It was the company's pride, a project developed to revolutionize rail transport in America, reducing costs and increasing efficiency. Ironically, it now represented an imminent threat. On the tracks, the situation of Lily and the colt was becoming increasingly critical. Dr. Richard had managed to administer an intravenous solution to the animal to hydrate it, while Samuel and other volunteers worked tirelessly to cut the ropes that kept them bound. The girl, now fully conscious, trembled with fear. He said it's a social experiment, repeated Lily between sobs. He wanted to see if people still care about each other. Tara embraced the girl, trying to calm her while the men continued their work. "Who did this to you, dear?" asked the teacher, stroking the child's hair. "The doctor from the big house. He caught me when I was feeding the horses." Lily's words confirmed the suspicions growing among the residents. Lucas Vaughan was not just the eccentric businessman who had bought Daybreak Farm. There was something much more disturbing about his activities. At the farm headquarters, a restored colonial mansion, Vaughan was observing everything through images captured by security cameras strategically installed along the railway. In his office, decorated with contemporary art pieces and state-of-the-art monitors, he remained impassive in the face of the desperation he had caused. For him, this was not cruelty, but a necessary sociological experiment. Trained in social psychology at a prestigious American university, Vaughan had developed controversial theories about human behavior in crisis situations. He firmly believed that modern society had lost its capacity for genuine empathy, and that only in extreme situations did people show their true nature. His previous research, conducted in other countries, had gone unnoticed but always generated data for his articles published under pseudonyms in obscure academic journals. This time, however, he had underestimated the strength of the rural American community. As he observed the growing mobilization around the rescue, an expression of scientific interest mingled with the recognition that he had made a strategic error. His assistant, Melissa Carter, an ambitious young woman who saw in Vaughan a mentor and a door to the international academic world, entered the office with hesitant steps. "Doctor, the images are circulating on social media. The FBI has been notified, and there's a helicopter trying to reach the site." For the first time that morning, Vaughan's expression changed. It wasn't remorse that could be seen on his face, but the cold calculation of someone who needs to manage an experiment that has gone out of control. "Activate the contingency protocol," he ordered dryly, "and prepare the car. We need to be present when everything happens." At the old switching station, progress was slow and painful. The main lever, designed to be operated by 2 men when still in ideal condition, now required the combined effort of 5 people. Gabriel, using his engineering knowledge, improvised solutions to free the stuck mechanisms. "We're almost there," encouraged the young man as sweat ran down his face. "A little more and we'll be able to move the lever." The sound of the train could already be heard in the distance, a mechanical and constant sound that increased the pressure on everyone. Jack looked at his watch. Less than 20 minutes remained before the tragedy if they couldn't complete the diversion or remove the girl and the colt from the tracks. On the tracks, desperation was growing. Samuel had managed to cut part of the ropes, but a complex knot still kept Lily tied to the colt. The animal, feeling the vibration of the tracks, was beginning to get agitated, making the work even more difficult. "We need more time," shouted Samuel, sweat running down his wrinkled face. It was at this crucial moment that Paul, the young reporter, made a risky decision. He sent his drone toward the train, hoping that the autonomous vehicle's front cameras would detect the object and trigger the emergency system. It was an uncertain bet, based only on his superficial knowledge of how autonomous systems worked. "What are you doing?" questioned Dr. Richard, watching the journalist manipulate the controls of the small device. "Trying to gain a few minutes," Paul replied without taking his eyes off his cell phone screen. "If I can make the train reduce its speed, we'll have more time." Meanwhile, on social media, the hashtag Blue Ridge was becoming one of the most commented topics in America. Human rights and animal protection organizations were mobilizing to pressure authorities. The American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals and the National Council for Children's Rights issued public statements demanding immediate action. In Atlanta, the governor of Georgia authorized sending a special rescue team, while the FBI prepared to investigate Lucas Vaughn. Small Blue Ridge, previously forgotten on maps, was now the center of national attention. At Daybreak Farm, Vaughn and Melissa were getting into a luxurious imported car. "Doctor, are you sure we should go to the site? Wouldn't it be more prudent?" Melissa's sentence was interrupted by a firm gesture from her boss. "Presence in the field is fundamental for data validation. Besides, we need to control the narrative." What Melissa didn't know was that, for Vaughn, this wasn't just a scientific experiment, but the culmination of years of obsession. His interest in horses and children, his childhood traumas never overcome, transformed into academic theories that masked deep psychological disorders. As the car traveled the winding road leading to the tracks, Vaughn was mentally already writing the article that would document that experience, showing no remorse for the suffering caused. At the switching station, finally some progress. With a deafening creaking, the lever began to move. "It's working!" shouted Gabriel, renewing the group's energy. Jack pulled out the radio, borrowed from Samuel. "Sam, we're doing it. Hold tight over there." The response came interspersed with static. "The train is already in sight. Hurry!" The sound of the train was now unquestionable, reverberating through the valley. On the tracks, Samuel finally managed to untie the last knot, freeing Lily. However, the colt, frightened by the increasing vibration, refused to get up. "He can't walk!" shouted Tara, trying to pull the animal by the improvised reins. "He's too weak." Desperation took over the group when the silver silhouette of the experimental train appeared in the distant curve. It was an imposing machine, a symbol of technological progress, inexorably advancing toward the human drama unfolding on its tracks. At that moment, the fate of a child, an animal, and an entire community seemed sealed, dependent only on the willpower of ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances and on the human capacity to overcome its own limits when confronted with the need to save innocent lives. At the switching station, the lever finally yielded with a metallic crash that echoed through the valley. The mechanism, inert for decades, came back to life under the calloused hands of Blue Ridge residents. Gabriel, with his face covered in sweat and grease, carefully watched the tracks as they slowly began to move. "It's working! The tracks are changing position!" shouted the young engineer, while the rest of the group continued to force the lever. Jack, with muscles aching from superhuman effort, grabbed the radio communicator again. "Sam, we did it! The train will divert to the abandoned branch line." The response came interspersed with static. "Thank God, but we still have a problem here. The colt can't get up, and even if the train diverts, it still passes very close to where we are." That information fell like a bucket of cold water on the group. The diversion wasn't a complete solution. They needed to remove the animal and the girl to a safe distance. On the tracks, Samuel and Dr. Richard were desperately trying to make the colt stand up. The animal, weakened and frightened, was visibly trembling. Lily, now in Tara's arms, was crying compulsively. "Will he be okay?" "Please, don't let them hurt Valor," begged the girl, revealing the name she had given to the animal during her captivity. "Valor will be fine, dear," promised Tara, without being sure if she could fulfill such a promise. It was at this critical moment that Paul, the young reporter, had another idea. "We need something to transport the colt, an improvised stretcher or something similar," he shouted, looking around. The residents began gathering materials, tarps, wood, anything that could serve to move the animal. Paul's drone, meanwhile, continued its risky mission, flying toward the train in an attempt to force a reduction in speed. At Daybreak Farm, Vaughn's car was advancing quickly along the dirt road, raising a cloud of dust behind it. Melissa, seated next to her boss, frantically consulted her tablet, following the repercussions of the case on social media. The situation is getting out of control, Doctor. The hashtags Blue Ridge and Child on Tracks are the most commented in the country. Journalists from all over America are on their way to the town. Vaughn remained surprisingly calm, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. Interesting how media attention amplifies the scope of the experiment. Now it's not just a local community being tested, but American society as a whole. His cold scientific analysis shocked Melissa, who was beginning to internally question the ethics behind her mentor's actions. "But doctor, a child is in danger, and the cult—" Vaughn interrupted her with an abrupt gesture. "They are variables in the experiment, Melissa. Science occasionally requires sacrifices for the advancement of knowledge." It was at that moment that the young woman understood the true nature of the man beside her. He wasn't just an eccentric scientist, but someone whose obsession had surpassed all ethical and moral limits. Discreetly, Melissa unlocked her cell phone and began recording the conversation, an act of courage that could cost her job, but that her conscience demanded. Back on the tracks, the sound of the train was now deafening. The vibration of the ground increased with each second, while the residents worked frantically to save the colt. They had managed to improvise a kind of stretcher with tarps and cables, but moving the animal remained a colossal challenge. "Come on, folks, together we can do it," encouraged Samuel, positioning himself to lift the animal along with 5 other men. The colt, sensing the imminent danger, made a superhuman effort and, with the help of the residents, managed to partially rise, enough to be placed on the improvised stretcher. "Now, let's get him out of here," ordered Dr. Richard, assuming leadership of that group. With a coordinated effort, they began to drag the stretcher away from the tracks, each inch gained with sweat and determination. Lily, observing the scene, begged to help. "Let me go with him. He trusts me." Tara hesitated, but realized that the girl's presence might actually calm the animal. Carefully, she allowed Lily to approach and hold the colt's head, murmuring words of comfort in its ear. The moving scene was captured by Paul's cameras and immediately broadcast live, further amplifying the national commotion. Meanwhile, Paul's drone finally reached the train. As expected, the obstacle sensors detected the small flying object, triggering the automatic braking system. It wouldn't be enough to completely stop the composition, but it would reduce its speed, gaining precious minutes for the rescue group. The switching station, Jack and Gabriel anxiously monitored the tracks. "Will it work?" asked one of the residents, expressing the doubt that haunted everyone. "It has to work," replied Jack, determination evident in his voice. "We're not giving up now." The Future Valley experimental train, the pride of national technology, was rapidly approaching the critical point. Its sensors detected an anomaly in the track, the rails diverting to a secondary branch, and its artificial intelligence system was rapidly processing the information, deciding whether to follow the diversion or activate the emergency brakes. In line, the company's offices in Atlanta, engineers perplexedly monitored the data received in real time. "What's happening? Why is the system indicating an unscheduled route change?" questioned the operations supervisor. "And why is there a drone interfering with the front sensors?" The confusion was widespread, but one thing was clear. Something extraordinary was happening in Blue Ridge, and they needed to react quickly. On the tracks, the rescue group finally managed to drag the colt to a safe distance, exhausted but relieved. A few meters away, the train was beginning to reduce its speed, responding both to the diversion and the presence of the drone. Would it be enough? Everyone waited with suspended hearts. It was at this crucial moment that Lucas Vaughn's car arrived at the site. The businessman got out of the vehicle with his usual confident posture, his eyes analytically scanning the scene before him. Beside him, Melissa seemed visibly disturbed, her cell phone still discreetly recording. The businessman's arrival caused a moment of tension among the residents. Samuel was the first to react, approaching with firm steps. "Was it you who did this? Was it you who put a child and an innocent animal in life-threatening danger?" The accusation hung in the air, heavy as lead. Vaughan, maintaining his composure, adjusted his thin-framed glasses before responding. "I'm here only as an observer, sir. I saw the news and came to see if I can help in any way." His diplomatic response convinced no one. Lily, spotting the man, hid behind Tara, visibly trembling. "It's him, the man from the big house," she murmured, confirming everyone's suspicions. The imminent confrontation was interrupted by the deafening sound of the approaching train. All eyes turned to the tracks, where the fate of the small community would be decided in the next few seconds. The train appeared around the curve, imposing and threatening, advancing more slowly than normal, but still with enough speed to cause destruction. The moment of truth had arrived. Would the diversion work or not? Time seemed to freeze as everyone watched, helpless as events unfolded. The train hit the switching point, and for a terrible instant it seemed it would continue straight. But then, with a metallic creak that echoed through the valley, the composition began to change direction, following the abandoned branch line. A collective sigh of relief swept through the group, followed by shouts of celebration. The plan had worked. The colt and the girl were saved. Amid the celebration, few noticed when Melissa approached Paul, the young reporter, discreetly handing him her cell phone. "There's a recording here that you need to hear," she whispered. "It's Dr. Vaughan's confession about this whole experiment." The journalist's eyes widened as he understood the importance of that material. With a discreet nod of thanks, he put the device in his pocket, knowing he had in his hands the final piece of the puzzle. Meanwhile, Vaughan observed the scene with an enigmatic expression. For him, the experiment had been a success, regardless of the outcome. The community had mobilized, proving his theory about empathy in extreme situations. What he didn't expect was that his own assistant would betray him, transforming him from observer to object of investigation. The train continued its path along the abandoned branch line, gradually reducing speed until it completely stopped a few miles ahead, its safety system finally fully responding to the detected anomalies. The tragedy had been averted, but the consequences of that day were just beginning to unfold for the residents of Blue Ridge and, especially, for Lucas Vaughan. With the immediate danger removed, the tension in the air was replaced by a mixture of relief and indignation. The colt, now safe on the improvised stretcher, was receiving attentive care from Dr. Richard, while Lily remained by his side, caressing his mane and murmuring words of comfort. The girl, still with trembling hands and a face marked by tears, seemed to find in the proximity of the animal a source of security that no adult could offer at that moment. The bond formed between the two during their shared captivity was visible to all who observed the scene. Around them, the residents of Blue Ridge gathered in small groups, some still processing the dramatic events they had just witnessed. Others, directing accusatory glances at Lucas Vaughan. The businessman, however, maintained an unwavering posture, observing the scene as if analyzing data from a laboratory experiment. His cold eyes methodically scanned the scenario, occasionally pausing to make mental notes that would certainly feed his theories about human behavior. In extreme situations, it was Jack who broke the tense silence, approaching Vaughan with determined steps. The farmer, normally a man of few words, brought to his face a determination that impressed even those who had known him for decades. "Do you have any explanation for all of this?" he questioned, his voice carrying a moral authority that came from decades of respect in the community. "A child and an animal almost lost their lives today, and from what we're hearing, you are directly involved." Vaughan adjusted his glasses again, a gesture that seemed calculated to gain time. An attentive observer would notice that despite his apparent calm, A vein was pulsing in his temple, the only visible indication that control of the situation was slipping from his hands. "Mr. Miller, I understand your concern, but I recommend not jumping to hasty conclusions. I'm as shocked as all of you by this unfortunate incident. I will certainly investigate if any Daybreak Farm employee was involved in this deplorable situation." His diplomatic response was interrupted by an indignant cry from Tara. The teacher, who until then had been focused on calming Lily, couldn't contain her outrage at the businessman's cynicism. "The girl recognized you. She said it was you who took her. How dare you stand there pretending innocence?" The direct accusation caused all eyes to turn to Lily, who was now visibly trembling in the teacher's arms, hiding her face as she realized that attention was turning to her. Samuel, who had joined the group after ensuring the train was completely stopped on the abandoned branch line, positioned himself protectively beside the girl, as if wanting to spare her from another confrontation. With her tormentor, Vaughn narrowed his eyes, his mask of civility beginning to crack. For a brief moment, something dark and disturbing showed through his countenance, but was quickly replaced by an expression of professional condescension. "Ladies and gentlemen, as a psychologist specializing in trauma, I can safely state that traumatized children often confuse faces and create false memories as a defense mechanism. It's a well-documented psychological phenomenon in scientific literature. The little one is clearly confused and frightened." His technical arguments, although well-articulated, failed to disguise the condescending tone with which he addressed the residents, as if speaking to children incapable of understanding complex concepts. It was at this moment that Paul, the young reporter, stepped forward, his cell phone in hand. Until then, focused on documenting the events and transmitting the images to his social networks, he had captured something that could completely change the course of that confrontation. "Maybe this will help clarify things," he said, pressing the play button. Vaughn's clear and unmistakable voice filled the air. "They are variables in the experiment, Melissa. Science occasionally requires sacrifices for the advancement of knowledge. The girl and the cult are just elements of a larger social test. Understand?" The silence that followed was deafening. Melissa, standing a few steps behind her boss, kept her eyes lowered, guilt and relief battling in her countenance. For months, she had been a silent accomplice to Vaughn's questionable activities, justifying to herself that the advancement of science compensated for the controversial methods. But the experience of that morning had crossed all the ethical lines she could still defend. Vaughn turned slowly toward his assistant, betrayal stamped in his gaze. For an instant, the facade of civility completely disappeared, revealing the cold fury of a man accustomed to controlling all variables of his experiments, now confronted with the unpredictable. "You don't understand the importance of what we're doing, Melissa. This is bigger than all of us. The data collected today could revolutionize our understanding of collective behavior in crises. You've compromised years of research with this impulsive act." The expression of indignation on the faces of Blue Ridge residents intensified. Gabriel, who until then had remained silent, advanced toward the businessman, being restrained only by the firm gesture of his grandfather, Samuel. "It's not worth it, my son," murmured the ex-railroad worker. "Justice will take care of him now." As if to confirm his words, the sound of approaching sirens cut through the air. The arrival of the first police cars interrupted any additional response from Vaughn. Led by Sheriff Henry Alderson, the police quickly surrounded the area. The sheriff, a middle-aged man with a thick mustache and a perceptive look, had been informed of the situation during the journey, and came, prepared to face something serious, although the reality exceeded his darkest expectations. "Lucas Vaughn?" he asked, approaching the businessman. "You are detained for questioning on suspicion of false imprisonment, animal cruelty, and endangering the life of a minor." The formality of the words contrasted with the barely contained anger in his voice. Henry was the father of 2 girls, and the grandfather of an 8-year-old boy. For him, crimes against children occupied a special place of repugnance. "This is absurd," protested Vaughan as he was handcuffed. "I am an internationally respected scientist. I have friends in Washington who will not be happy with this treatment." His veiled threats did not intimidate the sheriff, who had spent decades dealing with criminals of all types. "Scientist, huh? Well, you'll have plenty of time for your theories in the cell. The judge will love to hear about your experiments." As Vaughan was led to the police car, Melissa approached the sheriff, handing him a folder that she had been discreetly carrying in her bag. This contains documents about other experiments conducted by Dr. Vaughan. He calls it Project Empathy. Artificially created limit situations to test community reaction. There are records of similar cases in at least 3 different countries. The sheriff's eyes widened as he quickly leafed through the documents. Titles such as Riverside Case, Isolation of the Elderly in Controlled Flood, and Uppsala Experiment, False Contamination in Primary School, jumped from the pages, accompanied by detailed methodologies and meticulously documented results. "This is disturbing. We'll need your complete testimony at the station, miss. And I suggest you get yourself a good lawyer considering your involvement." Melissa nodded, the weight of years of silent complicity finally being removed from her shoulders. "I am willing to fully cooperate with the investigation, Sheriff, and I accept the consequences of my actions." While the police conducted the initial procedures, a fire department helicopter finally managed to land in a nearby field, bringing specialist doctors and equipment to attend to Lily and the colt. The girl, despite the trauma, refused to move away from the animal. "He protected me," she insisted when a doctor tried to take her for evaluation. "When I cried, he tried to move to loosen the ropes, even when he was weak. I can't leave him alone now." Dr. Richard confirmed the story, explaining to the specialists that there were marks on the ropes indicating that the colt had tried to break them with repetitive movements, despite its extreme weakness. "It's extraordinary," he commented quietly to the newly arrived veterinarian, Dr. Lucy Montgomery. "The animal seems to have developed a protective bond with the child. I've never seen anything like it in 30 years of practice." The veterinarian nodded, observing the interaction between Lily and the colt. "There are recent studies on emotional intelligence in equines that suggest capabilities far beyond what we previously imagined. This case certainly deserves detailed documentation." The news of this bond between the child and the animal further moved those present and quickly spread through social networks, where the case was already gaining national dimensions. The hashtag Bush, Valor and Lily was beginning to appear among the most commented topics, accompanied by expressions of support from celebrities and animal and child protection organizations. Hours later, at the Blue Ridge police station, a normally quiet room now bustled with activity. Journalists from across the country crowded at the entrance, while state and federal authorities arrived to take over the case. The regional prosecutor, Anthony Carson, had been personally designated by the Attorney General to conduct the investigation, an indication of the seriousness with which the authorities treated the incident. At the center of that whirlwind, Melissa Carter was giving a detailed testimony that revealed an even more disturbing story than the residents of Blue Ridge could imagine. Dr. Vaughan is not just a social psychologist as he presents himself, she explained, while the clerk frantically typed. He has training in mass behavior and neuropsychology, with specialization in crisis responses. For years, he worked for governments and corporations, developing crowd management protocols in panic situations. His impeccable academic career had been built on initially legitimate and ethical research, published in prestigious scientific journals. However, over time, Vaughan developed a growing obsession with testing the limits of human empathy in extreme situations. convinced that only the real fear of death could reveal genuine behaviors. He started with experiments approved by university ethics committees, continued Melissa, controlled simulations in laboratory environments where participants believed they were in danger but were actually completely safe. But over the years, he moved away from protocols, convinced that only real life or death situations could reveal true human nature. Gradually, Vaughan began to create real risk scenarios in small communities around the world. Using his personal fortune and a network of front companies, he manipulated situations to observe how people collectively responded to danger, meticulously documenting everything for articles published under pseudonyms in obscure academic journals. He chose Blue Ridge for its isolation and the automated railway line, explained Melissa. The united community, the driverless train technology, the terrain that made external communications difficult. Everything fit perfectly into what he called ideal parameters for a high-impact experiment. Sheriff Henry listened attentively, his expression alternating between disbelief and indignation. "And how did he morally justify these acts?" he asked, trying to understand the mentality behind such coldness. Melissa sighed deeply before answering. He didn't see it as immorality. For him, it was pure science. He often cited historical examples of controversial scientific experiments that, despite questionable methods, brought significant advances to humanity. He frequently said that the value of the acquired knowledge would surpass any temporary discomfort of the subjects. The sheriff's expression hardened. Temporary discomfort. He put a child and a defenseless animal at risk of death. Melissa lowered her eyes. He had contingencies planned, monitoring systems and teams ready to intervene at the last moment. But I admit the risk was real and unjustifiable. It was when I realized he had crossed all ethical boundaries that I decided to record our conversation this morning. At Daybreak Farm headquarters, now surrounded by police and forensic experts, investigations revealed the true extent of Vaughan's operation. A sophisticated laboratory, hidden in an expanded basement under the main house, contained state-of-the-art equipment for behavioral monitoring and analysis. Cameras, sensors, and recording devices covered not only the property, but were strategically installed at key points in town, including the central square, the school, and the old railway station. On encrypted servers, investigators found the meticulous planning of the Blue Ridge case, as Vaughan had called it in his files. Every detail had been calculated with disturbing precision. The choice of Lily was not random. The girl had been selected after weeks of observation for demonstrating above-average sociability and resilience for her age. The colt had been specifically chosen for its docile nature and the bond it already demonstrated with humans, despite the gradually induced malnutrition to weaken the animal without causing permanent damage. The exact location on the tracks had been determined after thorough analysis of the terrain and the train's travel time. Even detailed predictions about how each key resident of the town would react, with psychological profiles compiled on Jack, Samuel, Tara, and other community leaders. "It's as if he had studied each of us like lab rats," commented Sheriff Henry, observing the files with increasing repulsion. "There are notes here about the daily habits of practically all residents of the town center." One of the experts, analyzing the communication systems found in the laboratory, made an additional disturbing discovery. Vaughan had installed a secondary system in the experimental train that would allow him to take control remotely, should the community fail to perform the rescue in time. "He never really intended to kill anyone," explained the technician. "Just create the illusion of imminent danger to observe the collective reaction. But the system he developed was experimental, and there was no guarantee it would work at the critical moment. The risk was real." At the regional hospital where Lily was transferred, doctors confirmed that despite the psychological trauma, the girl had no serious injuries. Dr. Patricia Norris, a child psychiatrist specializing in trauma, was conducting a preliminary assessment, impressed with the child's ability to articulate her experiences. "He said it was a game," reported Lily, firmly holding a small stuffed horse that a nurse had given her. "He said he wanted to see if the people in town were really good or just pretending to be. He said he would give me a prize if I stayed quiet until the end of the test." Her mother, Carmen Silva, a young woman who worked as a temporary cook at Daybreak Farm, could not contain her tears as she listened to her daughter's account. "I looked everywhere when she disappeared. He told me Lily had run back to town, that she was probably with some relative, and I believed him. How could I have been so blind?" Dr. Patricia tried to comfort her. "Don't blame yourself. This man was a skilled manipulator with resources and knowledge to deceive anyone. The important thing is that Lily is safe now, and with proper support, children have a surprising capacity to process and overcome traumatic experiences." The colt, affectionately nicknamed Valor by Lily during their shared captivity, was transported to the Equine Veterinary Medicine Center at the University of Georgia in Atlanta. There, a team led by renowned Dr. Mark Silva initiated intensive treatment. Initial assessments confirmed severe malnutrition, prolonged sedation with a carefully dosed cocktail of drugs, and signs of post-traumatic stress, but with good prospects for full recovery. The animal demonstrates surprising vitality, considering what it went through, explained Dr. Mark to the press that crowded at the doors of the veterinary hospital. "We are optimistic about its complete physical recovery, although the psychological impact is more difficult to assess in equines." The images captured by Paul's drone during the rescue went viral on social media, generating a wave of national indignation, but also a surprising mobilization around the cause of animal and child protection. Celebrities, influencers, and companies began announcing donations for Valor's treatment and psychological support for Lily, initiating a movement that would soon expand far beyond the specific case. In the improvised meeting room at the small Blue Ridge Police Station, state and federal authorities were discussing the next steps in the case. The complexity and international implications of Vaughn's activities required a coordinated operation involving multiple agencies. "We need to track all previous experiments," argued an FBI agent. "There are indications of similar activities in rural communities in Chile, Portugal, and Indonesia, and we suspect that some tragedies reported as accidents may have actually been experiments that got out of control." Meanwhile, in the homes of Blue Ridge, families gathered to process the extraordinary events of that day. The small town, previously forgotten on maps and ignored by the news, was now the center of national attention. For its residents, however, more important than the sudden fame was the confirmation of something they had always known intuitively, that in moments of crisis, true strength comes from community unity and the invisible bonds that connect ordinary people, capable of extraordinary acts when confronted with the need to protect the vulnerable. 3 months after the dramatic events that transformed Blue Ridge from a quiet, forgotten village into a national symbol of unity and courage, life was following its course, now at a different rhythm. It was a sunny Saturday morning when the central square began to fill with residents and visitors. Colorful banners decorated the posts, and a small stage had been set up near the bandstand. The reason for the celebration? The official inauguration of the Valor Center for Animal Recovery and Child Therapy, installed in the former premises of Daybreak Farm, now expropriated and transformed into a community project. Lily, wearing jean, overalls, and a t-shirt with a horse print, was running animatedly among those present, distributing leaflets about the new center. The trauma of those terrible moments on the tracks had left inevitable marks, but the child psychologist who accompanied her weekly was surprised by her resilience. Children have an extraordinary capacity for healing when they receive appropriate support, explained Dr. Claire Rodriguez to worried parents. And in Lily's case, her bond with Valor has been fundamental in this process. Valor, the colt that almost lost its life on that fateful morning, was now peacefully grazing in a special enclosure at the back of the square, waiting for his moment to participate in the ceremony. Recovered after weeks of intensive treatment, the animal had become a national celebrity. His story of protection towards little Lily, trying to loosen the ropes even in his debilitated state, had moved the entire nation. Jack, now president of the newly created Blue Ridge Animal Protection Association, was supervising the final preparations for the event with poorly disguised pride. In the last few months, his life had changed drastically, from a solitary farmer to a nationally respected figure in the field of animal welfare. "I never imagined that at 60 I would start a new career," he commented to Samuel while adjusting the microphone on the stage. The former railroad worker, in turn, had become a kind of official historian of the town, relating the events of that day to each new group of tourists who now visited Blue Ridge, eager to know the place and the people who performed the heroic rescue. "People want to hear about courage and solidarity," explained Samuel to the skeptics. "In such a divided world, stories like this bring hope." Gabriel, his grandson, had decided to remain in town after concluding that his engineering knowledge could be more useful there than in any large company. He now led a revitalization project for the old railway station, transforming it into an interactive museum that would tell not only the story of the rescue, but also the rich railway tradition of the region. "The lever that saved Lily and Valor will be the centerpiece of the exhibition," he explained enthusiastically to visitors who crowded to see the ongoing work. Paul, the young reporter whose drone had helped reduce the train's speed, now hosted a weekly program on the nation's largest broadcaster focused on stories of overcoming and community solidarity. "The Blue Ridge case showed me that journalism can be a force for good," he frequently declared in his interviews. "We don't just need news about tragedies, but also about how ordinary people can do extraordinary things." Melissa Carter, Vaughan's former assistant who had delivered the crucial evidence for his conviction, had found a new purpose as coordinator of the newly inaugurated Center for Ethical Research at the University of Georgia. Her work now consisted of establishing rigorous protocols for social experiments, ensuring that the pursuit of knowledge would never again justify the suffering of innocents. "Science should serve humanity, not the other way around," she stated in her lectures, often using the Vaughan case as an example of the dangers of scientific fanaticism disconnected from ethical principles. As for Lucas Vaughan, the billionaire who had orchestrated everything, he awaited trial in a maximum security prison. His case had generated heated debates in academic and legal circles about the limits of scientific research and individual responsibility. Curiously, even incarcerated, Vaughan maintained his posture as an observer, taking meticulous notes on the behavior of other inmates and guards, as if still conducting one of his experiments. In Blue Ridge's square, the ceremony was finally beginning. Tara, now director of the municipal school that had been completely renovated thanks to donations received after the incident, took the stage to welcome everyone. 3 months ago, our small town faced one of the most challenging moments in its history. Today, we celebrate not just our overcoming, but also the positive changes that were born from that adversity. The audience applauded enthusiastically when Lily and her mother Carmen took the stage. The woman, formerly a temporary cook without stability, now directed the community restaurant at the Valor Center, where young people learned culinary techniques as part of a professional training program. "I want to thank each person who helped save my daughter and Valor," said Carmen, her voice choked with emotion. "You didn't just save 2 lives that day, but gave a new meaning to our entire community. Lily, overcoming her shyness, approached the microphone. "I really wish Valor could be here on stage with me today," she said, with the sincerity typical of children. "But he's very big and gets nervous with noise. So, afterward, anyone who wants can visit him in the enclosure. He loves carrots." The girl's spontaneity drew smiles and warm applause from the audience. Dr. Richard, who had coordinated Valor's initial treatment and now supervised the veterinary team at the center, explained the future projects. "In addition to treating rescued animals, we are implementing a pioneering equine therapy program where horses like Valor will help children with special needs. The connection between humans and animals has a healing power that traditional medicine has only begun to recognize." The highlight of the ceremony, however, was the announcement made by the mayor of Blue Ridge. The old railway line where everything had happened would be transformed into a bike path and linear park, connecting the town to neighboring municipalities. The project, funded by Future Valley as part of a social responsibility agreement, would generate jobs and promote sustainable tourism in the region. "The tracks that almost brought tragedy will now trace a path of development for our people," declared the mayor, to enthusiastic applause. After the official ceremony, Jack led a select group of guests to the enclosure where Valor awaited. The colt, now recovered and with a shiny coat, immediately recognized Lily, approaching to receive the girl's affection. "It's amazing how they maintained this connection," commented a journalist who was documenting the event. "After everything they went through together, it's as if they were family," replied Jack, watching with emotion the reunion between the child and the animal. "And in a way they are, just as all of us in Blue Ridge became a big family after that day." The repercussions of the case continued to generate unexpected fruits. Inspired by the story, a renowned film director was starting to shoot a feature film based on the events, with consecrated actors playing the residents of Blue Ridge. A publisher had published a children's book narrated from Valor's perspective, with delicate illustrations that captured the emotion of the rescue. The copyright royalties from both projects were fully reverted to the recovery center. At the end of that celebration, afternoon, as the sun began to set over the mountains that embraced Blue Ridge, Lily remained seated next to the enclosure, talking to Valor as if the animal understood every word. In a way, perhaps it did. Jack, observing the scene from a distance alongside Samuel, Gabriel, and Paul, reflected on the twists of fate. That crazy Vaughn wanted to prove that we've lost our humanity, that we need extreme situations to demonstrate empathy, but what he didn't realize is that true humanity is in the small daily gestures, in the patient building of a community. Gabriel nodded, adding, "And the most ironic thing is that unwittingly he ended up creating something positive. Look around. People who barely spoke to each other now work together. Projects that seemed impossible are becoming reality, and a forgotten town has found its purpose." Paul, always attentive to the media dimension of events, completed, "We proved that even in the digital age of social networks and individualism, communities still matter. People still care about each other when they have a chance to demonstrate it." The sun was disappearing on the horizon when Lily finally moved away from Valor, running to join her mother. The colt whinnied softly, as if saying goodbye, before calmly returning to his shelter. That night, as had become tradition, the Blue Ridge community would gather in the square for a shared dinner, with music, dancing, and stories. A celebration of life, courage, and the bonds that once formed in the most unlikely circumstances would never break. And although no one could predict the future, one thing was certain. The small town between mountains would never be the same. Again, what was once just a forgotten point on the map had been transformed into a symbol of hope and a reminder that, even in the darkest moments, the light of human solidarity never completely extinguishes.